I'm sorry, what's that?
Are you holding the fort down?
I don't know.
Recording in progress.
I don't know where is everybody?
I bet they thought it was too bad a night.
Good evening, how are you?
Because
Good.
Jen isn't here yet either.
Well, they had a 6 o'clock board meeting, which I didn't know that.
Oh, all right. It's kind of hard to do it without the two leading players if we're going over the school budget.
Well, Janet is very capable and we do.
Oh, here-
I just
here
see a
they
car
come.
coming in,
Here they
so
Yeah.
You two guys can present.
No, they're coming.
let's hit the minutes. If we can do that while we're waiting for. The one correction I have is to delete John, who wasn't here according to my record, from the people attendance. Does people have any other
Sorry.
corrections?
And I had an excused absence.
Oh.
All right. Good. I didn't see where it said, I don't know, normally put those down, do we?
Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. I've handwritten it in, so.
Any other corrections, changes, or amendments to the minutes?
I'll move the minutes of December 13.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, the one thing I wanted to say now is we don't really have an agenda per se. Today's meeting was to, one, the school changed their budget significantly over what they proposed originally. So we'll go over that. And we've got the first wording of the bond, and we haven't had any presentation about the bond issue, which is the elephant in the room, for lack of a better description. And then next week, the selectmen will be presenting a revised budget to us, plus their warrant articles. And hopefully, we will then be able to go to, I don't really want to go the bond to the public hearing based on tonight, because we've never had a chance to see it, think about it. We may be ready to go agree on what will go to the public hearing for the OE budget, depending on how we react to the revisions. Big Frank, Frank's smiling.
Better than the other.
Is Jen en route?
Jen Boylston, is she coming in? Do we know?
I don't know.
Okay.
But that's kind of hard to go to a school budget without a, Frank will, yeah.
You're elected.
Yeah. You can come up to the table or sit there.
I think I've been working from here. I think this works
Yeah.
in the past, so if this
All
works.
right, most people, you should have this sheet. Everybody got this sheet, which is the sort of summary sheet. And then we had a new, this
Yep,
sheet.
I think it's in the packet,
Yeah, it's in the packet.
third page.
So, and then we've got a one page, which is the projected or estimated revenues for the school. And then we've got the warrant.
Thank you for these. Do you need this? I'll play secretary, but you don't need it. Anybody else? Doesn't have it?
All right, would everybody here, I'll just say this once, will you check in and make sure that, yeah, Jordan gets your names correctly for attendance at some point before you disappear, because I will never get them spelled right, so. All right, Frank, you're on.
Okay, so I think we were gonna take a look at this sheet to start. We didn't really change anything in the budget other than the items that I've enumerated on this sheet. We had talked about using some of the high school trust money to help offset. And so our approach on this was to use about 50,000 out of that fund. I think that fund is still a little bit high. Over the next couple of years, it might be nice to bring that down. I'm working on a recommendation to the board, which I'll bring to them to get to a level, I think, a little bit lower. But, and in the end, I'll talk a little bit more about high school tuition. If you remember, I'm sure from last year, but also probably years prior, nailing down high school tuition is a really tough one because we never really know what the rates are gonna be until we're, right at the end, if we even know then exactly. So I'll talk a little bit about that when I finish with this page. We had a lot of conversation around the enrichment line, and so we did end up taking $10,000 out of the Washington DC trip line, so there's still 10,000 in that line to support that trip and to support the educational value that's associated with that. So we did make that adjustment. We had overlooked funding our substitute teacher line, and so we had to put that money back in. So that was an addition. Because we do think we'll probably need substitute teachers next year. We have been talking probably for the last 6 months about electricity and the cost of utilities. So we had that line budgeted fairly high, and so we were able to reduce that by $21,530, and we think we're still probably in a very healthy position there. I don't think we're going to have any difficulty with the amount that we left on that line. The next 3 lines kind of all work together. They increased the summer custodian line, and at the same time, we reduced the building and grounds salary line and the salary-driven benefits. And what we had, in our original budget, we had still been in discussion about how we would want to handle that function at school. And whether we needed 3 full-time employees of our own, or if we would only have 2 and continue then to backfill with contracted services for the remainder. And we ended up deciding that we're really quite happy with the arrangement we have right now. It's working extremely well, and we're very happy with the people that are working for us, both from the contracted service side as well as the 2 employees that are now working for the Lyme School District.
So that's 2 plus a backfill?
Pardon me?
2 employees with a backfill?
Right, 2, yes, so we have 2 employees and then contracted service to take care of the rest. So that allowed us to pull that part out because it left us needing a little extra help probably in the summer so that those 2 guys could get their vacations. And we could still have somebody there every day, especially if we have construction going on. So that's how that balanced out. Altogether, that brought us down to the $8,780,992.39, which was the $187,394 increase, or about 2.18% on the operating budget before we add in the CBA change. And the bottom line on all of that was 4.78, which we were feeling pretty good about. But so now the unsettled items. So our feel-good kind of went away a little bit since we sent this out a day ago. And the high school tuition, we got notified by Thetford Academy that their tuition is going up about $800 per student over what we had budgeted, and we had already increased those rates by 2.5%. We have reached out to St. Johnsbury Academy, Rivendell, and Hanover, and have asked them to please send us, if they can, their new tuition rates, because we have a feeling we're under, even with the 2.5% increase that we put in, that we're gonna be under. So we have some real serious thinking that we need to do over this next week before we come to the final hearing about whether we will try to use more of high school trust to cover that, or if the increases may be at a point where we actually have to raise the amount a little bit in high school Lyme. So, to be determined. We'll do our very best to have that resolved as soon as we can for you.
All right, at the public hearing, we can make minor changes, but not major changes.
Right.
Because there's always a couple of things refining.
Right. So I don't think that's gonna be too bad. The other item, which is a little bit more unnerving, is our food service transfer. And that has traditionally been, over the last few years, at a $25,000 level. And that level has never been sufficient. And so we had increased it, yet we have budgeted to change our food service, going back to a chef, with the hope of having much better quality food and also much better participation. But to make that work, we would have to sell $155,000 worth of lunches. We generally sell around 90.
70.
So that to have that actually go up that far, is that too high?
Yes, 70.
70?
Has been the highest
Our
year
best
we've
year
had.
was 90?
No, we're
No.
hoping.
We're hoping
For 90 this year.
This year. Okay, we're probably gonna end up at 70 again this year. I don't think we'll hit 90, but anyway, insufficient. So we have to raise that transfer, that line. And that's probably gonna have to go up by about 65,000. That will probably add about 0.6% to this bottom line. I'm thinking maybe a little bit more. So that's the bad news tonight.
That's basically a loss then from the food service. is
It's
what that
always been a
transfer
loss,
represents.
yeah, it's always been a loss, yeah. We're hoping to, that'll start to come back more in balance. We really don't have any other revenues. We do not participate in the National School Lunch Program. That tends to really limit the kinds of foods that you can offer, and does not return very much in the way of funding. I know Hanover also does not participate in that program. It's just not worth it, and it really does tie your hands around what kind of lunches you
Now,
can
you can still get the surplus food cash even if you're not in that program?
No,
No.
no. Commodities, you're talking about USDA commodities? The answer is no. You have to be part of the National School Lunch Program to get that.
Sorry to be late.
Yeah, come here.
I can see you that way, John. So, that's really kind of what my presentation was gonna be on, general operating budget for that article, so, I think probably to address questions. if you have questions.
Raise your hand.
Yeah, you said that Thetford Academy has given you the bad news of $800 increase. What's the new price gonna be?
Do you have that?
$23,890 per student.
23,800. Okay,
23,890.
okay.
Thank you.
And they're very close between Thetford and Hanover, aren't they now?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
within
And St.
$1,000.
Johnsbury is lower?
A little bit, but they're creeping up as well, so,
There's no free lunch is what you're telling me.
that's right.
I had a question on the enrichment instruction. You said that you reduced it by 10,000, but I don't, maybe I'm not reading the spreadsheet right, but it looks like it's only been reduced by 1,000 in the spreadsheet.
I think that we took 10,000 from the last budget that we brought. So if it, is it showing,
I'm seeing, I guess I'm seeing one that said 27,984 and the new one is 26,994. So maybe I have it allocated.
Do we know what line that is?
yeah, it's on page 2.
1100,
5322.
Thank you.
It's in the middle of, it's on
Yeah.
10 to, yeah, 5322.
Oh, yeah.
Which one is that, educational or?
Enrichment, yeah.
Right
here.
See it?
I see it, but from the last budget, I think we took 10,000 out of it from the
The last,
last budget.
I don't think the last budget was at 20.
34.
It was 34. I
I
can
think
look
it
it
was
up.
34.
I can look it up.
I'm
If you don't
checking
have
that.
it.
Yeah, the one I'm comparing it to is from December 6th.
What was it at, 32?
No, on the December 6th budget, or the December 6th spreadsheet, it said 27,984. I think that was the one that we
Yeah.
were discussing last time.
Oh, so did I only take 1,000?
Oh, did you miss a zero? That'd be awesome.
Yeah. That'll be helpful. Here, don't, I can look.
But the bottom line of regular instruction has gone down some 20.
Yeah, that's a mistake, yeah. We missed a zero.
So that's good.
So that's the good
Yeah,
news. Thank you. That's very helpful.
So tell us what that line should read, does it
Yeah, that line should be,
26,984?
get back to my hands on
It should be 17,984.
it. Right.
Should be 17.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Good catch.
Yes.
All right, that will change your totals and everything else on the spreadsheet a little bit, I assume.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're gonna have other changes. I mean, the high school numbers would change everything anyway. And then the food service transfer. So can I ask a quick question?
So we're not ready to go to with a number for the public hearing.
Right, so my question is, because we always get to this crunch time, what is the place where you actually vote? Is that the first public hearing?
We like to only have one public hearing if possible.
Okay,
All right, next week's meeting
you want an
was
end number.
primarily the selectmen's budget, but it would be, because I thought we might be able to get the OE, out tonight, because we have a vote of what goes to public hearing for a number. That is not the vote to recommend or not recommend. That's only an agreement of what we warned for the public hearing. We would like, the way it sounds right now, it would be next week that we will do that.
Okay,
That we will come up with the numbers that will be the warning for the public hearing. We like to have one public hearing. We can make some changes, but we can't make significant change without having a second public hearing. The problem is, there's no definition of what a significant change is.
yeah.
So it's sort of, yeah, right.
So
They
if,
don't have a percentage, it's not.
No.
no, if Dina was here, she would tell you that next Wednesdays is the time that would be optimal
Yeah.
to have the
All my
committee-
articles ready.
to have the committee vote just to take what's there to the public hearing. But if something isn't settled, you can meet the next week to do it. And this board just votes to take it to public hearing. They don't say yes or no in terms of how, not the board, the committee. And then the, Wednesday, February 7th is scheduled to be the first public hearing, and it's on both town and school, warrant articles, and operating budget.
And that's the night you vote individually on each warrant article.
To recommend or not recommend, and the number of dollars to recommend.
So the MS 27 needs to be done on that night.
I can't
For that public hearing.
answer that, but probably so.
Okay, I just wanna make sure it wasn't next week that I have to have the MS
no.
27?
Not next
Okay.
week.
And we can make minor changes at the public hearing,
Yep,
but
Okay,
if it's a significant change,
can do it.
then we'd have to have a second public hearing.
okay,
And
excellent.
there-
Thank you, I'm sorry to,
That's
Yeah.
okay, let me just point one other thing, because someone asked me today and I didn't know, but petition warrant articles must be submitted no later than Tuesday, the sixth of February.
okay,
I'm not sure there's anyone here who's thinking of drafting a petition warrant article, but in case that question comes up, it's February sixth. Someone called me at home and I was like, stupid. It's coming up, I'm not sure when. So.
And if it contains money, we have to make a recommendation on it.
Right.
If it doesn't contain money, we ignore it on this committee.
There are some other things in your packet, if that's where you wanna go.
It's worth going
I kind of
over.
wanted to show you this pretty little chart, because there were questions last time about, we were talking about parity and equity and, how we
Last
would,
page.
look at salaries. So we had done a historical kind of study to just see, how the percentages over that period of time compared to CPI for the various groups. And in the end, they come out fairly close, and so, you know, in terms of what's happened to our union contract groups and our, non-union folks. And so that's what we were talking about when we used that word equity, between groups, at least over time.
Ours
we've
is not in
gotten-
color.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's hard to say.
Which one is which?
Okay, so the blue line is our non-unionized folks.
They don't have color.
they don't have color, they
So
can't
the
see it.
end-
Oh,
The one that's
Some
six
of us
point
have
eight
got
seven.
colors.
6.87, what color is
That's
that?
union.
Well, that's unit 4.
6.87 is the
Union.
CBA increase this coming year for the association.
What's the
That's
four?
union.
That's what they've got for raises for.
17.4, that is our ununionized staff members. And the green one is the, well,
CPI.
the other one, the 21.4 is the CPI over
The
that period of time.
2.7 Here,
Mr. Chair,
Actually, I think it was 3.2 today, but every month they come up with a new number.
Changes there.
Yes,
Anyway, that's kind of,
are we ready to go next?
Actually, I want just clarification on the notification here. The number for the staff, 21.4, that's a 2.5% raise, followed by a 1.5, followed by a 5.4, followed by 5, followed by 4%, sugars out to that 21.4% number?
Yes,
Okay. That's what I thought, I just wanted.
yep, it averages out, yep.
How did you do that, Janet? Cause when I do, for instance, I think I just did union and I come out to 23.
So the union salary grid, and
Just as an
I
example.
spent a lot of time doing the union numbers because we had new people, we had, people who retired over time. So I tried to take those numbers out, and if a person lands in the middle of the salary grid, with the way the grid is now, it potentially can have a greater increase if you're in the middle than you would if you were at the top. So I took an average of each year and calculated out what people's actual salary was, got rid of the people who were brand new, got rid of the people who retired, and then I really shook it out to try to make it a real number, as close as I could.
No, I see where the confusion is. That's actually not, we don't have to cover that, cause I'm sure they'll all shake out, but when there are percentages over year, you can't just add them up, right? They multiply, right? Like if you have a 1.7.
The geometric series rather than.
So it's
Right,
an
so the-
average, I did an average, so I did the percentages and then how many years it was. Should have been an average.
Let's look at it as showing that there is a slight difference. At certain points in times, the union people were not getting as much as the non-union, and now recently, the union
So you
people
might be missing
with the new contract or closing the gap and getting a little more than the non-union. Qualitative, take it as a qualitative graph rather than a quantitative graph. Is that a fair assessment?
I would say so, yeah.
And,
Yes.
and overall, it stays close.
Because it doesn't,
Yeah.
I mean, you're never gonna have pay absolutely fair for everybody. That doesn't happen in the real world.
Okay.
And then you have a fund balance sheet that you gave us that gives us an idea how much assets we've got left sitting there to cover mistakes. And you gave us a history of what we were taking out, that's all from the trust funds.
right. That's the high
It's
school.
all in the town report if you wanna really figure it out.
The history was just for the high school.
Yeah. And you can get really nailed on special ed with just one kid coming in costing $200,000.
So, and then with the food service, we did give you this, you know, someone had, and couldn't remember exactly who, but it had come up, how many lunches do you serve? Everybody's your student count, whatever. And so we put together this historical data that shows the number of lunches served over the years. And if you look at the top, it says whether or not there was a chef or no chef or contracting. Of course, we have the COVID years there too, which affected things, so it gives you some data.
Trouble with food services, it's an offset, it can be offset by your revenues. You don't know how successful your chef's gonna be.
Right.
Yeah, but this, if you look at it, it does give you a little bit of an idea of the difference in, you know, sales overall, I guess, it does. And you do have the transfer in, you can see what our deficit numbers are going through the past. So it looks like our deficit is much less when we have a chef overall. But we did have, and we were part of National School Lunch Program, so we did have $11,000 in revenue each of those years.
Which years are those,
So in 17, 18, 19, you can see the funds transfer in, but you can also see we were getting state aid and federal aid,
gotcha.
which offsets those dollars. We no longer, because we're not part of National School Lunch Program, we no longer receive the federal aid and the state aid. So everything has to be driven by sales and funds transfer in.
And I have a question too about the,
Yeah.
So there's like a lot, what accounts for all the adult meals, is that?
Yeah. So that's a kind of a funny thing too, so in the past where it says à la carte, it says à la carte, and all the adult meals, for the most part, were going into this big pool that said à la carte. So the student meals were broken out when they were running the kids through the pause machine. They were very specific, and they had, you know, student meals and adult meals. But the adult meals, for the most part, any teachers that were buying lunch, it was going into an à la carte item, which is not subject to reimbursement from the federal or state government.
I see.
It
So it's
just
when
got
they-
pushed
when
into
they
a-
go through the line and
Right,
they decide which
right.
category.
And you can see that when it gets into the FY '23, all of a sudden becomes small, large, and adult, and that adult number shot up. Because now we have new software, and it's tracking small and large lunches, and then there is actually a button for adult meals, and they're being put into that category. So à la carte does it, although it does exist, they aren't using it 100% for all of those meals. It's really, if somebody gets an extra side, or that's what's going into à la carte now. But that's why there's a shift in the way it looks, as far as the sales are concerned.
Could you do, you know, since you wanna increase the number of meals sold, you know, I'm just wondering if there's a way to offer, I know that the community in the past has been welcome to come, but whether there might be a way for people to come and get a meal, you know, like a to-go meal, you know,
If
whether
we-
that's the viable, or whether there's like homebound people who might enjoy, you know, a meal that might be a way to increase the sales of those school lunches,
Yeah.
just a thought.
We used to do that in my last school district. We had a chef and he had, community night. And he made spaghetti and salad and his own homemade bread, and people came in and just were in the cafeteria, and he sold those meals, and all that money went into the food service program. But, yeah,
Fundraiser dinner.
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm looking around the room for questions, I can't,
are we gonna do we're not doing the bond, we're not talking about the bond?
does somebody wanna give us some ideas on the bond? So
Sure.
that we're not totally caught flat-footed.
Right, I don't,
The first question I have about the bond is, you're gonna have a public hearing over at the school at some point, aren't you?
Next week on the 18th.
yeah,
So the school, 18th, which is what day of the week, I don't know,
Thursday,
Thursday, at
6 p.m.
6 or 7?
7 o'clock.
7 PM.
At 7?
so, I'm gonna pass out a copy of this map. It's not, it's got very, very small print on it, that talks about scope of work. And that'll give you an idea of exactly what is being affected, in the plan for this bond. The bond itself, the amount of money on that is $2,599,317.
317.
So let me pass this around, so that'll give you an idea.
599-317, right?
So this work is, and I'm gonna let Jim at some point speak about this too, because Jim is our chair of our facilities committee, Jim Karami, and Kristen is, Roth is also on that committee. They've been very active, as well as Yola too. So, a little bit of quick history from my perspective is that when I came in as the superintendent, we were doing a warrant article at $90,000 a year for a number of years to try to do some of the work that needed to be done in the buildings, in some of the classrooms, to get them up to an educational level that was really kind of acceptable for students. But at the same time we were doing that, we also knew we were sitting on a lot of asbestos in the floors under this whole area that you see here that is colored in that light green.
Light green,
Yeah.
asbestos floors.
And we also knew that we have issues with lead paint in the old, what is now the cafeteria, but had been the old gymnasium. So if you happen to walk by, and you walk up to the older part of the building, that's the red building. The outside of that, it turns out, is also in very bad shape and has a lot of lead paint that needs to be abated. So the driving force behind this became, why are we doing $90,000 a year to, and not really taking care of what's really the underlying problems here, which is the asbestos and the lead paint. So that was the beginning of that. And when you start to do that, when we start to go into these areas to do that, there are a lot of associated costs, because when you pull up the floors, we also have to bring bathrooms up to ADA standards. There's a lot of work that needs to be done with plumbing and fixtures and all the rest of it. And the work that we were doing, 2 or 3 classrooms at a time, at the $90,000 a year. So the idea is to try to solve a lot of those problems all at once. There's also, there are issues, we have probably, I think, 3 different types of heating systems and controls, and a lot of issues with heat. We have rooms that sometimes are 85 degrees, and other rooms that you have to wear a winter coat that we can barely get over 45. So while we're doing this, we would like to get all of those controls onto a single system, and do some of those kinds of updates throughout the building. We've done 2 tours. We've had some people who have come through and take a look at things and see. We'll probably do more. And anybody who would like to is welcome to come at any time. And we would be happy to take people through and show them exactly what we're talking about with these areas, so.
I have one question.
Sure.
In this just passed budget, we had money in there for an architectural firm to do a survey
Correct.
and generate the report.
Right.
Is that report available anywhere?
This is the, what they have recommended for us in terms of taking care of this work. So this, their work is the basis for this bond. They've identified all the areas that need to be done, what needs to be done to bring them up to code.
My eyes
You're
aren't
not
good
gonna
enough
read
to
that.
read
Yeah,
it.
you're not gonna read that. I can't read it either. And it just came in this tonight.
Is that on your website or something like that where we can blow it up or
We'll get
download
it
it?
emailed to you. We'll send it to Dina. Okay, because on my computer, I can blow it up to see it.
Yeah, that's what we
Yeah.
would like.
Yeah, and you'll
And-
have all that data.
And if you send it to Dina, or you send it to Jordan, she can send it out to us. I don't know when Dina's coming
Yeah.
back, but.
Is the report available as he asked?
There's no real report. What they have done is presented us with a scope of work. And I don't know, Jim, you wanna address
I
that?
mean, is the asbestos friable? Is it underneath
It's
something else?
underneath tile, but the tiles are wearing and
How
getting
much?
to a point
What
where.
percentage are wearing?
Yeah.
Is
yeah.
it in one corner? Is it the whole room?
That whole area that you see in green is
So
So
affected.
that
That's the
every
Warren
floor
Barnes
that's green is worn through the
Yeah, I
tile?
think the only area that may not be, there's a new kindergarten room that was extended, and we're actually have testing that's being done on the 15th to really pinpoint some of that down.
Yeah, the extension's new construction, so there
Yeah,
exactly is no.
That part that was
asbestos.
redone was, we think is
The whole-
probably okay.
Yeah, the whole issue when you start ripping up an asbestos
Made
is
it
you
worse.
basically have to seal the area. And to take up one tile, you can sort of cheat a little bit. But if you're
Yeah.
taking up any significant percentage of it,
No, they're
You're
gonna
doing
have
the
to
whole
clo-
thing.
Yeah, they'll have to close it off and plastic and have the negative air pressure and all that too,
yeah,
yeah.
So could I ask, what's the, so 10 years ago when we did the construction project, the recommendation at the time was to, is what was suggested to cover, make sure that the asbestos is covered, it's encapsulated, and everybody was fine with that, so why is?
It's good for 10 years.
Well,
Yeah.
encapsulated again. How much does that cost?
Right, seems, I mean, that whole project was $2.5 million or
Yeah.
something, including the new building, so that's just, I guess, why I'm curious about why asbestos is suddenly a problem now, when, the recommendation 10 years ago was to.
Well, yeah, and you can encapsulate it, but I mean, I don't know all of the background on this particular school, but other places where I have been, you eventually get to a point where you can replace a few tiles at a time, and you can do that. But when you have to remediate an area that's as large as this, which is, I think, somewhere around 14,000 square feet, it becomes a project. And so, and when you do that, there are other needs that then need to be taken care of. So we're gonna have to, do a lot of.
Well, are they
Right,
real
so-
needs or regulatory needs? Are they real needs or regulatory needs?
No, they're both, I guess. Yeah. I
Right.
mean,
Is
if you look at
because
the.
I was on a school board and
Yeah.
we did this for years, and it's amazing how many years we were able to get by with a lot less money than the professionals who are getting paid recommended.
Right, well, and, you know, if you start to touch something, now you have to upgrade all the bathrooms, right?
Mhm.
And that gets a lot more expensive. And,
I don't know, I went through this on a steamship that was built in the thirties.
So, if I can- so I guess
This
the
was
whole,
just done 10 years ago.
the major question that I hear is, you know, why can't it be encapsulated again? Which seems like it would be a less expensive route because it wouldn't introduce the need to do all the other upgrades that would, what I'm understanding, would be required by a major project.
So, from my own point of view, is that once we tear up that, a whole floor in a classroom, we're going to be into a situation where we have to redo those bathrooms and bring them up to ADA.
Well, we're
But
saying,
I'm
why do
saying
you have
if you
to
don't
tear
have
up
to
the
tear
floor?
up the floor.
That's what
I
we're
guess,
saying.
yeah, generally the question.
So, Jim, you wanna help me
Sure.
out here?
So Jim Kamarmi, Chair of the Facilities Committee. When we discussed this at the town district meeting last year, I showed pictures of sections of the floor that were tiles were loose, that we had to re-glue or reattach.
And
There
are
are-
those actually asbestos, vinyl asbestos tiles?
So the
Or-
tiles that are on top are 12 by 12s, those do not contain the asbestos,
Okay.
to the best of my knowledge.
Okay.
Again, as he said, we have a independent firm coming in on the 15th, which is MLK Day, which is when nobody will be in the building, which is required to go through and take paint samples of everything, floor samples from places. Because what we have is our inventory from a few years ago, because we're required to keep an inventory of these hazardous materials. And while thorough, it is not entirely complete enough for, you know, what a construction firm would require to go into that space, because they wanna know everything that is in there. Underneath those 12 by 12 tiles are 9 by 9s, and then it is those tiles and the mastic that's underneath them that contains the asbestos. The solution so far has been to pour additional floor wax where the tiles are popping to encapsulate that, the tiles underneath. If you were to walk through the school, you'd walk through the main primary school wing where the lower school is, and it's, you'll see thresholds that are not even, and at those thresholds, just in the main hallway, without going into a classroom, you see the cracked tiles. When you go into the classrooms at the thresholds going in, you would see the additional cracked tiles, where they are then been re-glued down already several times. Those are the places where we know that there are some, we suspect, according to the inventory report, that we currently have a drop ceiling, and above that drop ceiling is another ceiling. They suspect by looking at it visually in the report that there might be asbestos up in those ceiling tiles as well. Again, that's up in there and so, you know, enclosed, so to speak, but
Has air monitoring shown any asbestos?
we haven't done any air monitoring, to the best of mine.
Why not?
Because
That's the issue, you breathe it.
right,
It's not hard to do air monitoring.
so the idea is to bring in a testing firm to complete this test. We can't do that, we have to bring a firm in, so that's what our plan is to do.
Are you gonna do air monitoring?
I'm not entirely sure what's included in the scope of the work.
No one has talked about air monitoring, but we can certainly speak to them about that when they come in. Right now, we're trying to identify where it is.
I know you have to do it at the end of the job,
Usually.
because before you can
certified.
open it up to the public, you have to have like 48 hours of air monitoring.
I,
And that was years ago, so you know it is at least that now.
I would make the point that knowing the, you know, like the houses in town, the old houses that have been renovated, most of the people that have renovated those houses have gotten rid of the asbestos and not just encapsulated it, right? Tile floors and things like that. So I think we, you know, I mean, I guess we saved some money by encapsulating in the past.
We
it's
should
really.
do air monitoring, I'm sorry, I was the head of it.
If I can finish,
School,
if I can finish, if I
we
can
do
finish,
air
please,
monitoring.
if I can finish,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah.
That we've saved some money in the past, and, if we want this school to last for decades, this problem is always gonna be there. I think we should, you know, in my opinion, it makes sense to put it to the town, whether they wanna, you know, build this school to last for several decades, or do we wanna keep trying to futz with the old part of the school? You know, if it were, you know, I can't say my house, I haven't, you know, I've done it by, elbow grease.
Yeah.
But most of the people in this town don't do it by elbow grease. They buy a nice house from an old house.
Yeah, well, I'm with
And
you,
I
I
think
do
our
it.
school deserves a nice,
What I'm getting at is that, number one, you do air monitoring, see what it is, but also look ahead, just like we did this 10 years ago. And say, we're gonna do this now, what other plans do we have for the school? What is projected size of things, and maybe just tearing up the floors and putting it down is another half a patch.
but I think if you tear up the floors, you're gonna have to do all the.
No, that's what I'm saying, but if these are the classrooms, are these classrooms you want? Or maybe you want something different?
There
That's
was
what they-
talk about a different layout or architecture last year, has that been,
It's been dismissed because of the
Yeah.
cost, the sheer cost.
like a layout
Yeah,
change?
it'd be huge too. That would involve moving the cafeteria down towards the gymnasium, so that, and then changing it where the current cafeteria and music room, where they are, into classroom space. And the thing is, once you get into these rooms, it really needs to be, the electrical needs to be upgraded, the plumbing needs to be upgraded, HVAC needs to be upgraded. A lot of these things are inadequate and old, and so once you go in and disturb that floor, you're making a commitment to fix those rooms up to what they should be as 21st century
But
classrooms.
there is, I mean, essentially, even if you did that layout, there remains the question of, imagine we bulldoze that entire section and completely rebuild it, what would it cost then? Is that cheaper?
Well, the reason I bring it up, Ken, if I could just talk for a second, we looked at a STEM building, a science building. And where we ended up was making what are called lab classrooms. And instead of just improving the airflow, we had an air monitoring issue. Instead of just fixing that, we said, wait a minute, what do we really wanna do? And we ended up with lab classrooms. This happened to be a science building, but, and that's just what I'm thinking, because I've been here long enough to have been through this 10 years ago. And, you know, it was billed then as, you know, doing what we need. And here we are, 10 years isn't that long. There are kids in the school who are probably in the school then are almost still in the school now. You know, pretty close, from kindergarten to ninth grade. That's all I'm getting at, in other words, have you really looked at? And last time around, people said, wait a minute, go back and look and see what you really need. And that's what, I mean, it's what we did with the fire department.
If I may, what you did 10 years ago has worked out really well. The new edition that was on, the 2014 edition, is a welcome and great educational space. The front of the building was not, other than the kindergarten space, you know, included in the scope of that work. So that part from 1950, 57, 59, somewhere in there, is existing, and for lack of a better term, it's showing its age. We are in a situation when we did the walkthrough with the consulting firms, they asked about where's your fresh air? And we pointed to the open window that was open, which was the only thing bringing in fresh air to the classroom. Now, in an educational environment, you're required to be breathing in so much fresh air, so the kids have,
Oh,
you're
yeah.
not gonna,
You
so
have to have
we,
so many changes per hour.
right, exactly, so we identified a few of those things in this project, so, the new educational space is fantastic, it's a great step forward for that part of the school. It's, the other part of the school has kind of been left behind, and when we look at doing this project, we're not asking for more educational space, because we have what we need in terms of the space and the requirements. I think it's more of just bringing it up to a place where it's a good learning environment. For example, having enough outlets on a wall is helpful, because it's still designed in 1957, 58, 59. Having internet connections in the room that are around the room is helpful. And of course, having the bathrooms that are not phone booths for Clint Clark to get changed in, because they are, if you walk into them, that size. And we do have to look at, and I'm not certain, there is insulation on the pipes in those rooms that might be suspect. It doesn't seem like it's friable to me, but I am not an educated.
A couple of other things you might think about are, where is technology going, how are the rooms? I mean, we built a house, it's all wired for stuff, now everything is, wireless, so you don't need that. But what technology is coming? The other thing is, your controls for your heating system, you're required to have so many air changes. But you can have monitors in the room that sense how many people are in the room, so that at night, the heating system doesn't change the air all night when there's nobody in the room. And that can be incorporated in your heating system, and it can tremendously cut your heating. And these are just some things that, if you're gonna spend this much money, you might as well, figure out what's the best way to do it.
And I think to your point, when you get a copy of this that you can read, that it's not so small, you will see that is included.
Yeah, well, that's what we wanna
Yes.
see in the report, what
You'll,
are we
you'll,
getting for
s-
this money?
you'll see, lighting controls, which are required now, occupancy, so that when somebody leaves the room, the light is not left on. It's good for our janitors, so when they walk out of the room, they're not, in the middle of the night, they're not, leaving a light on, but it also provides a level of security to the building. And there are,
Well, that could be-
HVAC controls
Yeah.
to
That could
monitor.
be integrated with the lighting for the
Yes.
air changes and all that stuff.
Yes, it's above my pay grade, but they did consider it and include that in this project.
I have two questions. Number one is, we got some COVID money that involved some upgrades to the heating and ventilating system a couple of years ago, as I recall. And I wondered why we still have more that we have to do to it after we got the feds to give us an upgrade 2 or 3 years ago. And the second one is, how much do we have left on the current bond that we're paying off? In other words, we're starting a second bond before we paid off the first one.
So I'll let Janet address that.
And while you're looking for that, I think another question that's interesting is, what are bond rates like right now? Because, like,
They're probably down again.
and already better in a year, right? Like, is it?
So,
Let Janet, you can probably answer the bonds right now.
I do, yep, got it. So, the bond payment that we have now, the big bond, will be, the final payment will be July of 2034, so you have another 10 years. The total due is $1,952,262.50. Your payment is $197,872. And then we have that small roof bond, remember?
What's the interest rate on that?
I think it was 3.5%, I have it here. Let me just look real quick.
All right, in other words, we've got 10 years to go on the
Yeah.
big bond, so it doesn't matter if we delayed this for a year, we'll only have one bond payment. We're not talking about that as a
Interest rate was
possibility,
3.3,
3.3.
yeah.
Yeah, I just sent around an amortization schedule, that's an estimate, based on a bond sale that happened on the 4th, I think, January
And what
of
was
this
it?
year, so it's just an estimate, but
Yeah, I mean, that was what I was trying to get
Yeah.
at, whether the, you know, we'd be able to get to the point where we only have one bond out.
So we have, one more bond, I'm sorry, the roof bond, and that payment, remember we took a short-term loan with Mascoma as opposed to taking a bond. And, we owe $28,715, and the final payment will be July of 2026. So that one's almost done.
Thank you, Janet.
Sure.
I just wanted to speak to timing and a little bit about the COVID money. I can't say for certain where that went, but in my conversations with the previous facilities director,
Yeah,
I know that he quoted 17 HVAC fan units, motor units that had seized and that had been replaced during his time working at the school. I don't know if that occurred during COVID,
Oh my God.
but I know that
It's all right, I got it.
that is something he did during that time that may have addressed some of that ventilation
well, I mean, there
concerns.
was a circulation and a HEPA filter issue, I think, with COVID money that they paid for. Because I think we had changed the filters on the system too at that time.
It's possible.
Yeah, I don't know how that was.
So that was like ESSER one and ESSER two money, and we spent about $35,000 on the heating system. But we didn't finish it, we were just fixing things that were seriously broken.
Jen, you had your hand up.
I know Jim has something else to offer.
I just wanted to talk in terms of timing, because that's been a big topic of discussion amongst ourselves and what we're bringing forward. This summer, nothing can happen this summer because there's no time. So we bring a bond discussion forward because if a bond were to pass in the timing world, then we would need to go into completing design work, mechanical work, design work over the summer. That allows us time to secure subs and secure equipment. Specifically, HVAC equipment is not something you can walk down to Home Depot and buy or order from Webb's necessarily right away. It would takes months to acquire it and get it on site. Because this project has a finite amount of time, from the end of school to the beginnings of school, which is a very short window. The summer slammer, for lack of a better term, is what they call it. Things need to be here and ready to go. So if they go to subs next December and go out to bid for subcontractors, and they have good subs, or we have good estimates from those guys sometime in January, February, then we have a good team and materials in place to go once on the ground as soon as school ends. That's the timing sequence of things. That's how long these things take. So this isn't a project that we're talking about this summer. Ideally, is a project we would be considering for the following summer, which is 25. So
That
that's,
may be optimistic. I
It-
waited 2 years for my heat pump.
it might be optimistic, but just in terms, you're right, just in terms of timing, because of the level of coordination that is required in the small amount of time they're trying to squeeze things in, that's, in the scope of work that we'd like to achieve, that's the timeline that we're looking at. Whether it's this year or the next year or whenever this moves forward, that's,
Well, the timing is tough. I
Very
mean, you
tough.
might wanna think about portable classrooms too in the meanwhile.
That may be necessary for part of it.
contingency plans.
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna have to have it, because what if they're not done? You can't put the kids out in the street.
Right. And it's important to think that this bond being brought forward is thinking ahead about where prices might be down the road in 25 right now. Because as John has alluded, there are several schools that have passed bonds that have found themselves, underwater. Where the bond does not cover the cost of construction.
Our bridges to Vermont, the design, et cetera, before the contract hit the street was 2 years for designing the Lyme Thetford Bridge and developing the bid package. So, and granted, maybe the scale's a little different, but the prices are in the same ballpark.
You probably didn't get to hear about the escalation of fire truck prices, but it's staggering. You know,
Everything.
Do we know enough about what the rate would be and what our annual cost would be for this?
For the bonds.
This is-
Yes.
yeah.
So Frank has a,
Oh, that's,
Didn't Frank
that's,
discuss
sorry,
that?
Yeah.
that's the big one, thank you.
Yeah. So if you know the answer to that, you're in the wrong room.
And this is an estimate from the bond bank, that was emailed to me, today. And they just, it's based on a sale that they just had in January 4th.
Did you look at anything other than 10 years?
This is
20.
20.
This is a 20-year?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's why, it just, like, I look at this and I see $1 million spent in interest, and that feels, for a $2.5 million project, that feels like we're being robbed.
For
That's 20
municipal
years.
bonds.
For- yeah.
No, this is robbery.
Like, I wanna know, maybe we think about doing this as a 10-year bond. Because the impact on the tax rate that I'm seeing over 20 years here doesn't seem that severe. And I wonder how these numbers, like what that final number would be compounded over 10 years.
I'm just saying 3.4%, when you start compounding, it adds up to a hell of a lot of money.
Exactly, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
And that's a reasonably good bond rate today.
That's great.
That is great.
You should call Bill Gates, maybe he'll give us some
So-
money.
we might even get a better rate at 10 years, I don't know.
Maybe we
Like,
get
we have to-
3.3.
We have to ask, I mean,
Yeah, I can
No,
make a
it's
request.
It's like 4.27 now.
But we're in an issue which we have to consider here more than the school does. We have to protect the taxpayer as a budget committee. And we've got a bunch of people in town that are really stretched to pay their taxes. And when we start issuing, $2.5 million bonds and buying $800,000 fire trucks, things like that start to add up.
They're over $1
You're
million
a
now.
million too
Million,
now.
all right, whatever. We got a lot of people in town that's really hurting them.
If I could just add one thing to what Jim was talking about, we did look at the timing a lot. Initially, as we were talking about it, we understood, some of us understood that the work was gonna try and get done this year. When we redid the budget, because it's really not gonna get done till next year, we had to add in extra contingencies and costs, because costs are only going up. This work is gonna have to get done, and it's not getting cheaper. So I guess that's the one thing I'd like to say about this. As we looked at it, we just knew that even delaying it till next year, it's gonna be more expensive. No way around it.
Is everybody,
Does the article have to include like the length of the bond? Or is that just
No.
a
So the-
overall cost?
the article that's in your, so I did give you a draft of the
Yes.
warrant, and that language is directly from the lawyer. So that would be, and it just authorizes the school board to engage in a bond.
I see, thank you.
doesn't have
Yeah.
a rate or
So that's something that they could
whether it's,
decide.
And to that point, like, what if there were private donors like we have for the fire station, right? Like there's, so we ask for the bond, then private donors bring in part of the money. We don't have to,
we don't have to borrow all of it.
That's what happened 10 years ago. You got cut in half, because we always have them.
So that you still know who these people were?
Well, it's not hard to guess.
This town has historically contributed to a number of town and school projects individually, but, and so that's certainly a good place to start. I don't think we get $2 million, but you might, we got several $100,000, the first school change that happened.
When you were on the
27 years ago.
committee, they paid for a couple of extras that weren't included in the,
And the Laura
National.
Barnes School, which is what is now the old school, was mostly donated, that was not built on the town bond. So, it's a wonderful community in terms of people helping, but you're still gonna have to have the numbers and borrow a bunch of chunk of cash.
you're authorizing them to borrow up to.
Yep.
I forgot, well, on the Academy building, we only borrowed about half the cost of that, I think.
That was
Right.
almost all private
Yeah.
donations out in Lyme Center.
Well,
So
How
let
are
me
we-
ask for a little piece of advice, based on what Jen mentioned about the length of time. I know these things can run anywhere from 10 years to 30 years. When I asked for a quote, I grabbed 20 because that just seemed like a more reasonable place to be. But I can certainly request a schedule for a 10-year bond, if you think that is something that's more palatable. That'll change the,
I mean, I think it would be at least worth considering. I mean, the board as a whole, we haven't even discussed the bond yet, the school board.
I think it's
Not in any,
premature to
not,
worry
yeah,
about.
like, not in any way that
Yeah.
is substantive with, like, this is the first time I've seen actual numbers for the
Yeah.
$2.5 million figure
Yeah,
as a
the
board, like,
yield
as a
curve's
board
inverted
member.
now. The short terms are higher than the longer terms in parts of the curves, which is unusual.
And, I mean, you don't know, but you do know one thing. It sounds as if you're spending an awful lot of money, but that payment of $50,000 20 years hence is only a couple of $1,000s in today's.
yeah.
So, the whole timing of these things, and as I say, the bond was written, we haven't negotiated yet. I think the odds of getting a bond of this size passed the first time through is pretty slim. Because I think people are gonna come back and say, there's a lot of stuff here that we don't really need right now,
Or we don't understand.
or we don't understand. And I mean, just the mumbling I've heard around town of the school board after 2.5 million is not what I would call favorable for getting it passed. And traditionally, a lot of our bonds have taken 2 or 3 times before they actually get passed. And some of them have been rises downward, some of them have been better education as to what's involved in them. You're just starting the education process now. It's hard, I'm not optimistic that it will pass the first time through with this amount of money.
I think another thing that the school board hasn't really discussed as a board is the fact that the local education property tax rate went up 11% last year, right? Which we haven't really talked about, but a lot of people in town.
Oh, yeah. They're fed up
Right,
with the
because,
schools.
because it's never, and I've looked historically, right, like that's a relatively large increase, year to year, and I don't actually fully understand still, although I've tried.
Yeah.
And I haven't had a lot of time, I have more time on my hands now, but to understand how DRA, really, how these rates get set, and I don't fully understand it, but, so I can't really speak to it, but there's another variable this year that people they may not be coming to school board meetings, right, and giving public comment, but they're publicly commenting
Yeah,
in the
but-
ether, and they'll show up at district meeting, right, and they have a point,
So, I
right,
mean,
it's
a-
becoming,
yeah.
it's becoming a challenge for some people to pay their taxes annually.
So if the facilities committee and the school board feels that this is what they would need, what they believe the school needs, and I believe that the majority of people do, it becomes an education process, and, that is something that we actually had a meeting earlier today, we discussed the beginnings of that. And so I think you'll see a lot of activity around that, but it's not uncommon for a bond to go 2-3 votes. And so, yeah, we'd love to have it pass on the first vote. It's gonna be way cheaper to get the work done if it passes on the first vote, because those costs and those interest rates probably will escalate.
Don't make a projection about interest rates.
Yeah.
You can't really predict
The
that.
cost
And
will
who's
go up,
paying
the
for it?
interest rates will
But,
not, the cost will go up.
I think,
And I mean, there's a lot of misunderstanding about it, and you can't, we're not ready in terms of the public for understanding this to make a rational choice yet.
right,
And so therefore, there's a lot of education that's needed. And it's a very short window right now to get that education done. And after you educate, that still doesn't mean the voters are gonna be in favor of it. So,
It's a good word.
Yeah. I think the only other thing I was thinking in terms of like the length of the bond, the one thing about a, relatively large capital project, the length of the bond is also, I mean, our town doesn't tend to be very transient, but the idea, there is sort of a packaged idea in there, which is that if I live here for 10 years and I sell my house, well, the next resident is contributing, right, to that capital improvement in the school that presumably if they have children or not, right, like their property value or their kids are then benefiting from, right? So there's, that idea is sort of, can be packaged into rationalizing what term length is reasonable, but I don't know.
you have to
But
look
yeah,
at the cost.
I think to look at to see the different numbers and see the impact on the interest rate and on the, amortization schedule and all of that, like, I think we should look at that
But we're
more
not
closely.
ready yet, we're not even ready yet, what I say, to sell for 2.5 million, let alone whether it's a 10-year or a 20-year bond.
Right, but I
The
think
public's
that,
not, you have to know that, but I don't think we're ready to present that to the town yet.
Well-
And this doesn't present that decision to the town, it says the school board will negotiate it.
Yeah, that's why I asked the question.
And that's all,
Right, but I
that's
think-
all you have to put to the town at
but I
this
think
point.
that at district meeting, I think that there are plenty of people in Lyme savvy enough to ask that question.
All right,
Like,
add the answer.
give me more information, and until I get more information, I can't vote yes.
Yeah.
So I think if while the warrant article says the school board will negotiate, I think we need to understand
The school board needs to
what our
understand
approach
it.
is actually going to be and tell the voting public that, otherwise I don't know that it's not gonna help us gain support, right, for the bond if we don't have those numbers.
All right, have we beat this animal to death?
I have a question not about the bond. Not about the bond. This is peanuts, this is relative peanuts. We talked I think, at some point, at some time, about pulling out the superintendent, search money and the strategic plan money as warrant articles. Has there been any more discussion about that?
At this point, they are still in the budget.
They're one-time
They have not been pulled out,
costs.
they're one-time costs that have not been pulled out.
Now, the question is, at what point is something a small enough number so that you leave it in the OE budget rather than as a separate warrant article? Because people get worn out sometimes at the town where we have the series of about 10 warrant articles every year. Some of them as low as $600 going into a particular fund. And they don't understand that you have to vote on that every year, but people think, why are we spending the time for $600 in a $3 million town budget?
Well, could I just say, I think that's, may not be how we would organize the budget, but if the school board and the administrators feel that's where they want that line item to be, they can put it there, and if at school district meeting there are enough votes to not want it there, they'll vote the budget at a lesser number. So it's kind of,
Are people burned out yet?
Yeah.
yes.
Does somebody wanna make a motion?
So,
All right, I will look forward to seeing people next week.
Absolutely.
And the only thing, I think we're pretty well on the school on the OE, but I think we've still got some work on the bond. And we've got quite a bit on the selectmen, so next week will be primarily the selectmen's revision, like what yours was for the OE, and the first hit on the selectmen warrant article.
Good, we'll try